This is the brand new vertical case from NZXT. It's the H2 Flow. Let's say hello. Welcome to Machines and More. On this channel, I cover a variety of PC building and tech-related topics. Today, we're talking about a brand new mini-itx case from NZXT. I'll share the features of this case. We'll talk about the build in it, the thermal testing performance, and I will wrap up with my thoughts on the case and whether this case is ideal for you. Now, before I begin, I do need to let you know that NZXT provided this case and the new power supply ahead of the launch for me to evaluate and provide review feedback for you. This video is not a paid review, though. I don't do paid reviews on this channel, and NZXT does not have control over the review methodology. And they'll hear the feedback at the same time that you do when this video goes public. And if you enjoy this type of content, please make sure to give a like and make sure that you are subscribed because it really helps the channel grow, and big thanks. So the new H2 Flow is a vertical style, sandwich style case from NZXT. They do have a big portfolio of larger H Flow cases that all feature this aesthetic where the front and back of the case has this column foot and an open space in between that section like the bottom of an H. This one is different from the H cases because those are traditional layout cases, and this one utilizes a riser cable that allows the GPU to be placed on the other half of the case, and it stands with the rear I/O of the GPU facing the bottom of the case. The case measures 435 millimeters tall, 181 millimeters wide, and the depth is 263 millimeters, which works out to 20.7 liters, and that technically makes this fall outside of that colloquial definition of small form factor. But this case has a compact footprint, and it's not going to take up as much space on your desk as a traditional horizontal 20-liter case would. The panels are toolless, and we can just pop them off, and let's talk about some features first. All right, this is the motherboard half of the case. The case requires a mini-itx motherboard. The rear I/O of that board is going to face the back of the case. Physically, this case does not have any extra room below that spot here for a bigger board, so this is as big as it gets. Underneath here is the bay for the SFX or SFXL power supply, which is installed with the fan facing the outside panel of the case because it does have a solid divider between the two sandwiched sides. Top half of the case features a tinted tempered glass panel that allows you to see the motherboard. Some may be using an AIO like this. This has an LCD display, and that can be fun and entertaining. The bottom half uses a vented panel. The vented panels in this case use 1.5 millimeter holes, and that'll vent your power supply. Speaking of power supplies, NZXT is also launching their C850 SFX Gold power supply. It's an ATX 3.1 power supply. I really like the small connectors on this guy. The stock cables are very flexible and they look very good, and it features a 0 RPM mode up to 30%, so you would expect that fan to come up during gaming with most GPUs on the market now. It's a nice power supply and it should pair nicely with this case. Up front is a large section for a radiator or fans. You can place up to a 280 millimeter AIO here, which is what I have, or two 140 millimeter fans. The tray also has a cutout for 120 millimeter fans, so you could also do a 240 AIO or a variant of 120. Like I mentioned, the filtered panels have 1.5 millimeter holes. Liquid cooling, it's going to be what this case is optimized for. It's what it's designed for. If you're just air cooling, there are more compact and more purpose-built cases for that purpose. And while there's about 75 millimeters of space for an air cooler, remember there's a glass panel directly over the board, and that's non-negotiable. That's the only panel that comes with this case. So a heatsink there, that's not going to be a great cooling choice for this case. Plus, this is going to be way more powerful. Now the front tray on this, I'm going to take it out and show you real quick. So I unscrewed the front tray, and it's a little bit different than what you might commonly see with a lot of cases. It's actually not flush to the outer surface, right? It's inset about 30 millimeters from what I measured, and then there's another 4 millimeters to the absolute extreme of the outer panel. So you could place a radiator up to maybe 34 millimeters there. Not sure how many there are that are that specific thickness. you know, your typical AIO radiator, it's absolutely no problem. And most liquid cooling users should opt to place the radiator in the frontmost section and then the fans on this side of that, like a sandwich, so to speak, with this in the middle. And this can be unscrewed like I've done here. The screw is actually held captive, which is quite convenient, unless you choose to unscrew these further. But then you can take the radiator tray out to do some maintenance and then pop it back in. Like I mentioned, this might be deep enough to house some AIOs with a slightly thicker than normal radiator, but definitely not something like a 38mm radiator. And then on this side, absolutely speaking, extreme to the spine here, you could run about 37mm of fans. These are 30mm fans. You do want to give some space here for cable management and a little breathing room. NZXT specs 60mm on their total between the fans and the radiator, and that's pretty conservative, but they're definitely building in some tolerances and I think room for cable management, because you see there's quite a bit of stuff here. So, you know, if you have more cables bunched up here, then definitely you're going to be a little more tight. But 30mm fans or 25mm fans, absolutely no problem. For airflow at the front here, both radiator as intake or exhaust can work. I'll discuss the trade-offs more in detail when we talk about performance, but I think for most users, intaking is going to get you a more balanced approach, and that's going to be in conjunction with the exhausting top fans. Up here at the top is the H2 Flow's top fan section. There's only enough room for 220mm fans, and it comes pre-installed with NZXT's F120Q. These are NZXT's own branded fans, and these only spin up to, I think, 1350 RPM, so they are more of a purpose-built case fan. They're not particularly noisy. I did limit mine at 800 RPM. I didn't really notice any odd noises. They sit in a tray, which prevents cables from getting caught up into the fans. You can swap out for fans as you want. These actually screw into the case from the outside. They're not regular fan screws. They're just like rad screws. And that's convenient because it's actually really going to be difficult to screw in from the inside out, just because you can't really get a screwdriver in there. So nice detail here, just 4 632 mounts. All right, this is the GPU side of the case, and this is utilizing a riser cable, which is going to bridge the connection from the primary expansion slot on your motherboard to this side, the GPU side. It is a Gen 5 cable, which, as many of you know, is still an expensive commodity these days. So that likely factors heavily into the overall cost of this case. Now, some of you may remember the NZXT H1, which wasn't necessarily a dumpster fire, but there was definitely some fire involved. That led to a recall, and yeah, hopefully they've learned a thing or two from that incident. And I have been running this without issues thus far. So Gen 5 versus Gen 4 cable at this point with current GPUs is not going to be a noteworthy performance difference. Maybe more of a convenience factor though. If you have a Gen 5 GPU such as Radeon 9000 or RTX 5000, does reduce the potential for incompatibilities, especially with the board's auto PCIe gen assignment. So I do have a video linked up here talking about that if you're curious. But in this section, you can have a very long card, up to 331mm. There's a total of 3 slots here at the bottom. The total thickness, you can go to about 65mm safely, width to 150, but I will caution you, this is a 120, I think 127mm wide card. And you can see this cable is already getting pushed pretty close to the radiator, so you do have to keep that spacing as a factor in mind as well. So at the back here, you see this little slot, the small slot cut out here, which is where your I/O cables for the GPU will enter. Now, it may be advisable to go for a 90-degree cable, especially if you are using DisplayPort. My straight DisplayPort couldn't fit, the HDMI did, but I think it would be better to have 90-degree cables just for peace of mind. And then lastly, at the bottom of the case, you have 2 front panel USB-A, one single USB-C, and then you have front panel audio. This is a nice big power button with a power LED. Very good positive feedback. And sleeved up to a single connector, which is very convenient, especially for first-time builders. One thing I also really like about this case is this SSD tray here at the bottom here. And if you are running 2.5-inch drives, it is a very convenient location to do that. This probably costs a little bit of vertical space that pushed the volume of this case above 20 liters, but I think it's vertical space, so it's not like it's changing your footprint at all. Okay, to build in this case, I used ASUS's B850-I motherboard, and it paired with the new AMD Ryzen 7 9850X 3D CPU. Underneath, I'm using the NZXT's C850 SFX power supply, and I really like the cables with this one. Nice combs and everything. And the 12-volt cable connecting over to the ASUS Prime 5080 OC on the other side. At the front, I've got the NZXT Kraken Elite 280, and I swapped out the stock fans for the higher performing F280X 30mm fan assembly, and that adds a little bit of lighting to the inside of the case too, which when you pair with that side glass panel can be entertaining. That's fairly straightforward, but with these types of vertical cases, it is nice to build up with some flexibility in mind, to be ready to lift off the motherboard or the radiator tray to manage cables as you go, because you definitely want to do that with this type of layout. It's harder to keep the cables tidy, but definitely I would leave the GPU to the end. Board first makes sense. Make sure your front panel connectors are hooked up. Then you can connect your radiator and AIO if you want to have a good sense for where the tubing and the cables will sit. Go ahead and install the power supply and the cables. You do have easy access to the entire board as well as the back of the board. So it's not necessarily to plug cables into the board first. One tip is the CPU EPS cable can just run behind the tray into the slot and just come out near the top. I think you will want to have your radiator and fans installed first before you do the GPU. There's a lot of cable management you will want to do, and you will need access to the area behind the GPU, but you're going to need to back that tray out to access the screws on the IO slots for the GPU. So you'll install the card into the slot and then re-secure the radiator tray. There are a lot of Velcro tie-down points, but the center spine doesn't have many drilled out tie-down points, and I had to improve a little bit when I needed some extra zip tie mounting points here. Thermal performance for this case is excellent. When you install the radiator fans as an intake, you're going to be balancing out the performance in a gaming scenario between the GPU and the CPU. You're still going to get decent GPU performance since you do have the top exhaust. But if you wanted to flip them around and have the fans working as an exhaust like I've experimented with here, that does shift the bias to the GPU at the expense of some CPU performance. When it's just the CPU working hard, it's not a big deal, but in a combined use scenario, when you're passing through the GPU's waste heat through this radiator, it does have a significant impact on CPU thermals, the hotter or more powerful your GPU is. So in a scenario with low CPU utilization in gaming, I really don't want to see CPU temps floating into the mid-70s, which is why I would shy away from this configuration. The 5080 that I've got here, it's going to work fairly well between those two temperature bounds anyway. Intaking fans, like I've set up with here, is going to have the added benefit of shielding some of these cables from getting caught up in the fan blades. It's not going to be perfect like having a set of cages, but it's not bad. Another consideration is that users don't like having the hot air coming towards them, especially with a desktop case like this. Exhaust passing through along with that GPU's heat could be uncomfortable when it's warm out. I guess it could be nice when it's cold, right? So, but generally speaking, I would recommend just running the rad fans at the front as an intake and then exhausting out the top. So it is a newly launched CPU, and I don't have too many comparison points yet with this exact setup, but I did compare to the slightly smaller, but still in that larger SFF segment with the NCase M3, which is set up with the same cooler and a similar airflow method. The fans there are different ones, but you can get an idea how well this H2 Flow works. Now, we'll note that the M3 is using the stock feet, so the GPU doesn't get a whole lot of breathing room. Inverting the case in that scenario would be much more preferable, but it's tricky if you also want a set of case fans at the bottom with those stock feet. But I wanted to get you more of a close apples to apples comparison airflow wise, just a comparison point for your reference. All right, pros of the case. First off, it's simple. There's one style, there's one board position, there's one GPU position, there's basically one optimal setup. It's all pretty much what you see is what you get. And that's good if you want simplicity and you just kind of want to do it, set it up, and forget about it, right? I'm glad NZXT didn't chase smaller volume here, because I think when you're getting smaller, you start eating into the ease of the build. As such, it is not difficult to build in for this style of case. It's compact, but doesn't feel cramped. There's plenty of GPU space and radiator space, and along with the top exhaust, the performance is quite good. The top fan section is something I find good value added, although it is a smaller section, but you don't get that with a smaller vertical case like the SSUPD Mushroom S or Meshlicious type of case. Okay, neutral. You may like this split glass and mesh, half and half arrangement. You may not. Some of you know the Lian Q58 has this glass and mesh split. It's a mix of form and function, but it does mean that air cooling capability will be significantly impacted in this case, which, like I mentioned, this may not be a big deal since the liquid cooling capability is so good. It's going to be disproportionately better than what a 70-ish millimeter top-down cooler can offer. Okay, some downsides to be aware of. There's not much about the case I don't like. The build quality, it's okay, and the panels, they line up mostly fine on my test unit, but they are a little bit thin though, and I've noticed that when you are taking the panels off, they can flex a little bit, especially when the toolless clips are a bit tight at first. So while it's relatively sturdy, I think the material definitely feels like, it's a little bit more on the budget side. Now, on the flip side of this one setup, one layout logic, there's not much flexibility with this case. There are cases smaller than this that can take a micro ATX motherboard. Cases smaller than this that can take an ATX power supply. You don't get that. That's a design choice, especially with this vertical layout. That's just a fact of life here. And also, I think that a few more added zip type points along the spine of the case here, along the edge, could be helpful as well. I've had to improvise with a couple of points here. Okay, this last thing is not unique to this case, but more the layout of vertical cases in general. The proximity and transparency of your noise generating components in the case will be more prominent. You're going to hear more fans more clearly because they're going to be at the front right next to you, depending on where you put this case or which side is facing you. The GPU may be more audible. The case is all mesh except for that glass side, which there's no noise generating component there, but then these components may end up being more audible just because of that as well. Pricing and SKUs, there's going to be one, to quote Auto Pioneer Henry Ford. You can have it in any color as long as it's black, and that's all you get. And one option with a Gen 5 riser cable. So it's going to run 150 US, and I'll have pricing listed down below for other regions. I think the Gen 5 cable is factoring heavily into the cost. The materials do feel mostly in line with some of their other H cases that I've seen in the past. Next size up in their lineup, for example, is the H3 Flow, and that's a $60 case. This feels similar material-wise, and there's, I guess, less material, right? So this case definitely feels like more of a $60 case that's paired with an expensive riser cable, and some of that cost maybe the lower production volume of this SKU as well. For perspective, NR200P V2 with Gen 4 cable has been around the $85 to $110 mark. Mushroom S with the Gen 5 cable has been $160. Another vertical case is the Fractal Mood, which has been $165, and that's a Gen 4 cable. So I think this is in the ballpark. I might have liked the Gen 5 cable to be an option in addition to the Gen 4 as an option, because do you really need a Gen 5 cable at this point? But it is more convenient. One thing I would also factor in when comparing against horizontal layouts is the expense for a 90-degree cable. You will want one, especially for DisplayPort cable users. Now, that's not unique to this particular vertical case. All right, who is this for? If you are interested in and new to smaller cases like this one, and you don't want to agonize too much about the setup, you don't want to overthink airflow, just want to pick your key components and have a mostly doable build experience and game with it, I think this one's for you. If you're looking for a smaller case and you want to save on desktop space with this vertical layout, but you don't want something difficult to build in or manage, still looks intriguing, this one can also be for you. In the SFX case, there are many cases though that can do a 280, and many that feature much more premium materials or colors. So if you are an enthusiast looking for something special or that higher end feel, or someone who's experienced and you want an upgrade, this wouldn't be it. But I think plenty of users just want to hit that middle of the mark, do a good price to performance build, and this mostly hits that spot. So that'll do it for this one. Make sure you are subscribed. I will leave links for this guy and some of the components down below. Please go ahead and check those out. And let me know what you think about the case in the comments down below. Big thanks for watching.